I think if I didn't love what I do, I think that would get really old. But I love working with this mission. I love, working with the musicians and my staff and my board. And so it makes it a lot easier to get out of bed, even when I know, I got a big crisis I have to deal with when I get in today. But I love what I do.
Hi there. Welcome back to another episode of the Conductor's Podcast. I'm your host, Chao Wenting. I'm so thrilled to have you here tuning in with me today. Last week, we spoke with conductor Sarah Yunanados, and she shared with us her experience being music directors of different American orchestras at different states and how that career path and family life was like. So today I thought it would be interesting if we hear things from the other side of the table, the orchestra management. Arts administration is a relatively new area, even though people have been managing ensembles for hundreds of years, right? But having professional ensembles framed by professional arts manager or as arts administrators is relatively new things. In academics, at least. So, some schools are offering degrees in arts management, arts administration, or offering courses that can be taken by music ed students, music performance students, or conductors, and all that. But truth to be told, a lot of the people running performing arts organizations might not be trained musicians, trained dancers, trained actors. Some of them might be that they switch career, but a lot of them are not. Especially in the States, they somehow, if we kind of joke about it, stumbled on the position and they do well and they thrive, or when they don't do well, it's a disaster. We hear a lot of those stories. And today, my guest, Anne-Catherine Murray, is the executive director of Augusta Symphony here in Augusta, Georgia. That's an organization that I have been working with since the beginning of the 2021 season. That will be September 2021. She joined the Augusta Symphony in 2015, and since she has led several really impressive projects, including the international search for a new music director, the completion of the $23 million capital campaign and construction project to restore the historic Miller Theater, which was gifted to the symphony as its permanent home. And also, of course, managing and navigating the pandemic that we are just coming out of, hopefully, with the musicians and, securing donors and continuing to provide great music experiences to the patrons. And it was such a pleasure for me to speak with Anne-Catherine about her experience managing the ensemble, and I can't wait for you to hear our conversation. Hey, welcome to the show, Anne-Catherine. I'm so thrilled to have you to the Conductor's Podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Joanne. I love seeing you and being with you, and we already missed you here at the Symphony.
Oh, thank you so much. I can't wait for you to share your story with my audience. So before we get started, can you tell everybody a little bit about your background and how you get to where you are to manage an orchestra?
Yes, will probably not be the normal story that your audience will hear because I really did not set out to manage an orchestra. My background is very different. I actually have a master's in historic preservation. So I've started off here in Augusta, Georgia, doing some pretty big rehabilitations of historic buildings. Not as the owner, but just working for people who are doing that. And so, restoring old cotton mills and turning them into loft apartments and retail and office space and several projects like that. And that also got me into building a nonprofit in a small mill village just right outside of downtown Augusta called Turn Back the Block, where we're trying to promote home ownership and making it a possibility for folks who might not otherwise be able to afford to be a homeowner. And so I was really doing those two things for a long time and had just sort of decided that in my preservation jobs, we didn't have a lot of active ones going on around 2015. And I was becoming really more of a property manager, and that really wasn't very fun for me. And so I kind of let my employer know that I was going to start looking to do something different, and then really did not have any idea what I was going to do, but still had a job, which was great. And then somebody who was on the board of the Augusta Symphony approached me and told me that they had been looking for an executive director, and they thought that I might be a good fit for the position and asked me if I wanted to interview. And I just almost had to laugh. I said, well, you are so kind, but you must think I know something about orchestras. And yes, I played the flute in the 7th grade, and I grew up playing the piano till I became a cheerleader. Obviously, you have the wrong girl. And they said, well, we've had people in this position who had the musical background. We're really looking for someone who can bring something else to the table. And based on some of the things that you've been doing in the community, we think you might be that person. And I have to say, Joanna, resisted even an interview for some time. And then finally I was convinced and went through the interview process. And I really liked the people that I was interviewing with. And I made it very clear to them, I'm not coming into this, pretending that I know a lot about orchestras, and ended up being offered the job. And I will say that it was one of the hardest decisions I ever made. I really was afraid. I really thought, well, this sounds like a really cool opportunity. And, the money was pretty good, I have to say. But I really was afraid. I was really afraid, Joanne. I just said, I will fail. I will disappoint people. I will not be able to do this job. I don't have the experience, and I will fail. So it was pretty hard. I had to really do some soul searching, and I finally did accept the position. But I will say that first, several weeks, I was panic stricken. So I kept thinking, why am I doing this to myself? But in the end, it's proven to be a really good fit for me. And I feel that I've done a great job with it, despite all of those things that I didn't know and still don't necessarily know about orchestras. So that's maybe too long of an answer, but that's how I got here.
No, I think you did great. And then looking back 7 years later, so much had happened, especially with the pandemic. Like no one was prepared to go into a global pandemic. And you managed everything with grace, from what I heard from the staff, from the musician, from my colleagues. They all so appreciate you. So kind of looking back after so many things had happened, and we'll talk about them. What was the biggest challenge for you?
Well, I think a lot of the challenges were fun challenges. So like getting the Miller Theater open, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but that was a project that was well underway before I came on board, which was trying to raise money to open, to rehabilitate a historic theater that had been donated to us. But that fundraising campaign, like I said, was well underway before I got there. So I wouldn't say that was the biggest challenge for me. I think the biggest challenge was actually coming out of the pandemic, if you can believe that. Just there's so many things that went on during the pandemic. We did an organizational restructure. We took over management of our theater. We kind of maintained a skeleton crew over at our theater. And then when it was time to reopen, it was that crazy time that we're all still experiencing, where people just either didn't want to work or left the positions. And suddenly I had this theater to open back up and nobody to run it. And it was very, very scary. But in the end, that all has all come back together. So I think just dealing with some of the critical personnel issues after the pandemic has been probably the biggest challenge for me.
Yeah, personnel management is something, for me, it's always difficult because we never learned to do it well in schools, at least for me. And then when it happens, it's always something that's critical. That's it's hard to negotiate, but we'll get there in a moment. So you mentioned the Miller Theater, and for the audience didn't know about what's going on. So I heard the Miller Theater, the home of the Augusta Symphony, was gifted to the organization. Can you tell us a little bit about that, even though it started before you get on board?
Sure. Yes. And I probably won't get the dates right, but I came on board in 2015, but I think it was maybe even 6 or more years before I came on board. Somebody had offered to donate a historic theater, which was in serious disrepair, to the Augusta Symphony. And it, they had to do a lot of due diligence to decide whether or not this was a good investment, because as you know, you cannot keep a theater open just by the symphony performances that would happen there. So it meant so much more than that. And I should mention that another reason that I was hired was because of my historic preservation background. And so this was a historic preservation project that involved getting historic preservation tax credits. So that is a key piece I left out earlier. But so we had to do everything right so that we could get those tax credits. We could not do anything that would harm the historic integrity of the theater, but we still needed to make it the state-of-the-art facility. It was very challenging, but it was very fun. And so we had a deadline to be up and running in January of 2018. And November of 2017, we were still, trying to get the seats reinstalled in the theater. I mean, it was literally down to the wire to get it open, but it is open. We opened on time to a sold out gala on January 6th of 2018. And, it's been just a thrill for the entire community, because that theater sat empty since 1984, just in bad disrepair. Wow. It was built in the 40s and then fell into disrepair. And now it's doing what it was meant to do. And it's the home of the symphony, which is fabulous. But we also have all kinds of other events there throughout the year, comedy and rock concerts and theater and dance and you name it. So it's been really exciting, with the exception of the pandemic. But anyway, we're getting back on track.
Of course. And for people coming from the orchestral side, we know like the two biggest challenges for running an orchestra are space and people. So you need a big enough space for all the people. And you need to manage a group of very talented and devoted musicians. That's another challenge, of course. But I figure that's, as you say, that's probably why that they thought you would be a good fit, because they were doing this historical preservation. And also you've been in the community for so long. Did you feel that helped your fundraising process, that you've been a face to the community already? You had connections instead of bringing in someone that knows only management or only knows music?
Maybe so. I really hesitate to take much credit for the fundraising for the Miller Theater, because that was done by a really strong team of volunteers and some staff members as well. But I do think that it's been helpful that I have some of the connections that I've made in my previous work in terms of finding sponsors for the symphony and for getting folks to, invest in the Miller and the symphony since then. So maybe I will take a little bit of credit for that, but not a lot.
No, I'm sure you did a great, like you were such an important role in that campaign. So after you took over the symphony, like it sounds so odd for me, like the English term like took over. It's actually kind of, it always feels to me like you actually take something over, but it's not really. But I understood that you led a search for the music directorship very quickly after you came on board. And that would be something a lot of my audience would be curious to know, because almost all of us were always on the other side as applicant. And we don't really know how people on the other side of table run it, what they're thinking, what they're looking for. And can you tell us a little bit about the experience?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I would say, once again, I don't think this was a typical music director search. This was done differently. We were getting ready to open our theater in about a year or less. We weren't really expecting this to happen. And so our current board president at the time said, we need to fast track this music director search. And I think a lot of these searches can take years, but ours was done in less than a year. And I would highly recommend it. I don't really have anything to compare it to, except for I saw the notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of the previous music director search that had been done 9 years or so before I got there. And whew, I mean, it just seemed like a lot. So this was very much fast tracked. And I was really still very, my job at the time was very much focused on the Miller Theater getting open. And I really don't have the experience to play a role in the music director search in terms of his or her musicianship or that kind of thing. So we had a committee of board members and a few staff members who had more experience in that area than I did. And they would take these, I'm going to say videos for lack of a better term, and all the things that got sent in, it's a blur. I can't even remember how it all happened. And they reviewed all of these candidates. And I remember somebody in our community has a little movie theater, a private movie theater in his basement. And he let them go over there and do the final, reviews of all of these candidates to narrow it down to 3 candidates. And we had those candidates come in. I think that for that season, we had some guest conductors. And then we had the 3 finalists conduct a symphony concert, as well as come to several events that we do when we have a concert and speak to our patrons and do a Q&A, that kind of thing. And they were all great. Really, they were all great. But we did end up hiring Dirk Meyer, who is wonderful and best decision we ever made. Our musicians love him. Our community, our patrons love him. And I think he has really helped the Augusta Symphony move forward light years. So we really worked out great.
Yeah, he's really wonderful. And if you see him talking to the audience, you'll be amazed that he is such a great communicator. It's been wonderful. So each orchestra is a little different. And how do you usually work with the musical staff? Or do you just let them do their thing? And then if that is the way how you work with each other, like what do you handle as the executive director?
We really try hard to stay we don't have to try hard, actually. We easily stay in our lanes. So he and I are kind of side by side, but I'm really over all of the staff. And he and I both report to our board, to our executive committee. And I think it's different, as you said, in different orchestras. Sometimes the music director reports to the executive director, but not in this case. And then we have our artistic operations team who report both to me and to him. They may work with him more closely in terms of, when he's putting together a concert, that kind of thing. But really, we stay in our lanes and we have a lot of mutual respect, and we do a great job of presenting a united front to the staff and to our patrons and to the musicians. So I think we have an excellent working relationship. I know that is not always the case, and I know it can be really uncomfortable when it's not. You have the situations where either the executive director or the music director could be a diva. Those things happen, and that can be really challenging. It would be very challenging if this was not a good working relationship. I know that for a fact. And so I'm really grateful that we have such a good rapport.
That is wonderful. Yeah, and you're so true. I think most of the cases, the music director either reports to the executive director or they directly report to the board. That kind of as a parallel 2 pillars of the structure. Depends, but it's very rarely the other way around, that the executive director reports to the music director.
Yeah.
Yeah. So most people, they are just coming out of music school or conservatory training. They don't have much experience dealing with the board, or like we know there is a board. And sometimes you have to report to them when you audition for a job or interview for the job. You meet some board members. So what is it like to work with a board?
Well, I guess I can't speak too much about how it is for a music director, except for just from observation. But I've worked for a board in a number of positions. So I think I've been fortunate to have good board leadership where they want what's best for the organization. And so, they've hired me and they expect me to do my job and they don't micromanage me, which has been great. I have been micromanaged before, and that is not very fun. But I would also say if you're being micromanaged, maybe you're not really doing a good job. So we have a really large board here at the Symphony, like averages around 40 people. So then we have the executive committee, and that's the group that I work most closely with in terms of personnel issues and big decisions for the organization. But I do enjoy it because they're really my sounding board. I mean, if I have a problem, it's not appropriate for me to go to my development director and say, I really, really don't like working with this particular person, or I'm really unhappy with this patron, or this patron is really making my life miserable, or what have you. So they're my sounding board. I can go to them and say, I have an issue. I'm really not sure what to do, or I've got a personnel issue. I'm in crisis here. And they provide that sounding board and guidance for me, which is really quite nice. I can't say that is the same for everybody in the board situation, but I'm very grateful for it.
So it looks like you have a group of bosses that you come to them, and depending on the structure of the board, that they might have different committees that you work with more directly than the large board meeting. Am I understanding it right?
Yes, that's correct. We have an executive committee and they meet every month, whereas the board only meets 5 or 6 times a year. And so that's a very close working relationship. And I think there are situations where a board can be very heavy-handed. They can say, and Catherine, we expect that you, I can't even think of an example, but they're really heavy-handed, and ours is not. In fact, I think we have board members who would probably like to even have more, be more involved. And so we're working to try to, post-pandemic, find things for them to do. We had committees, and everybody on the board was to have served on a committee. And those committees really just kind of went by the wayside during the pandemic. So I think I have board members who are kind of like, I'm here, I have a subscription, I'm writing you a check, I'm coming to your gala, I'm coming to your meetings, but what am I really doing? And so that's a place where I've got to do some fine tuning this year to really help get them re-involved to the point that they want to be. There are some people who are like, I just want to write that check. I don't want to do anything else. Don't make me go, fundraise or whatever. But out of, maybe for your listeners, our requirements for our board members are that they come to as many meetings as they can, that they purchase a subscription to either our symphony or our pops, both if they wish, that they make a minimum annual fund gift that we specify, and that they act as an ambassador for us in the community, either by trying to recruit new subscribers or bringing friends to the symphony and getting them interested, or, supporting us on social media, what have you. And so, they really do that. And I think they enjoy it.
So the boards are usually community members, right? They might be musicians themselves, or they might have family member who play some instrument, but they have a huge interest in supporting this group. That's how they became the board. But I understood that each board is different, but they will rotate. They have different terms. And how is it like working for a group of bosses that they change and they rotate around if they make different decisions from one turn to the other that doesn't always continue the previous decisions? How is that like?
Yeah, it's a good question. Our terms for our board president have been since I've been here, as they've been as long as 3 and as few as 1, just depending on things that were going on. But they've already, the incoming board president has already served on the board in some capacity for at least a few years. So you already know them, you've established a working relationship with them. And so it's not like it's just somebody comes in that you don't know. And they've already been sitting on the executive committee for a couple of years at least. And so I think, change is good. Sometimes change is hard, but change is good. It's always good to get fresh faces and it's a lot. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of meetings for them. And so they can get tired out too. And you want them to stay fresh. And I think usually it's good to work together for 2-3 years. And then they actually remain on the board for another year based on their being immediate past president. So they don't just jump off the ship. they stay for a while. So so far it's been a great, I think I've had 5 board presidents since I've been here. And I've really loved working with all of them. They all have a very different style. Some, want to be more involved and some don't. And I will say that the group that I worked with during the pandemic was amazing because we had a lot of personnel challenges. We had a lot of, all of the things that everybody had to struggle with during the pandemic with opinions and politics and all of that came up, and they were so great to support me because that is really, those were challenging times to say the least.
Yeah. So talk to us about the pandemic, because I know, especially here in Georgia, we are fortunate, especially that I was fortunate to get on board. I was going to say post-pandemic, but then we had some pandemic alone challenges. But I know in some other parts of the country or in some other countries, they are still, on a lockdown, or they didn't have a full season as we just did. Like we opened the season, and from day one, it was a full house. I was so amazed, and I think everybody felt the same, that you could finally go into theater and sit really close to someone else and watch a live show. So let's go back to like 3 years before, when everything shut down. How was it like?
I think we just kept thinking, this isn't going to happen to us. We'll be fine. We'll be fine. And then I remember it was March of 2019, and we were having a Pops concert. So it was not the last end of our season, but it was getting near the end. And I remember everybody saying, should we hug? Shouldn't we hug? Patrons like, should we hug each other? I don't know. Let's hug. And the next day, everything shut down. That was it. And it was kind of shocking. I don't know why. We should have seen it coming, but I think somehow we thought, well, we're in Georgia. We'll be fine. But,
we Georgians are fine.
I know. I will say my other friends in the business had a much harder time based on geography. And so I do feel for them. But we did great things. We ended up recording some Pops. So we actually brought musicians in and we did recording, and then we used those for subscribers. We did some live streaming with smaller orchestra. So we experimented with that, things that everybody, ended up figuring out. But I think we were really lucky because we own our own theater, and that gives us a lot of control that a lot of other people don't. So we were able to say, hey, let's, use the theater for live streaming, or let's, we own it. We're going to set the policy, what happens inside of the theater. So we definitely had flexibility that other people don't. So that theater was a huge blessing for us during the pandemic.
So on the personnel side, since you mentioned a few times, how was it like? Let's get to the staffing and personnel in a second. But before that, I was curious, did you have difficulty or problems retaining the subscribers? Was it hard to keep some income coming in, even though you didn't have live performances? Or how was retention with musicians? Were they comfortable coming in for even just a recording project?
Yes. Well, I'll start with subscribers and patrons. Our subscribers were so very generous. They still were able to have some semblance of a symphony series season, either whether it was either scaled down and live streamed. A few times we were able to bring a small group into the theater, and they were very, very nice about that. And they were able to watch it at home if they didn't feel comfortable coming in masked and socially or physically distanced, all of that. And our Pops, since we didn't even offer Pops, most of our top subscribers donated their subscriptions to us, which was incredibly generous. And we just rolled that forward to the next year. So, and then we were very fortunate to get a few levels of federal funding, like so many folks did, the PPP and the ERTCs and the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. So that was really big for us. So we were able to stay afloat, but really people were so generous. Yes, there were some people who either were mad because we opened a little tiny bit, even if it was masked and with physical distance. And then there were some who were so mad because we were requiring masks. You can never please everybody. So this. So we did lose some folks, and we definitely lost some of our older subscribers who just really didn't, and some still don't feel comfortable coming back. So, and I do understand that. And so we did lose some, but I think right now we're going through renewals right now, and we are on par with where we would be in a good year in terms of renewal rates. We're right where we would like to be. And for those folks who just don't feel comfortable, we've been fortunate to get a grant to video our symphony series concerts and provide that as a free service for folks. So we haven't announced that yet, but it's, we understand that it's just been life-changing for so many people.
How about musicians? Musicians were all pretty much coming back.
We've had a vaccination policy for all staff and musicians, and we still do at this point. And so I think we only had a few folks that did not want to comply with that policy or were unable to comply with that policy for whatever reason. I think most, especially ones who come from, we're a per service orchestra, so we have people coming from all over the country sometimes. And so they were coming from places that were much more conservative about the pandemic than the state of Georgia has been. So that was, for some of them, it was, you better have a mask requirement. So I think for the most part, our musicians, and I don't always hear, you probably hear more than I do. For the most part, I think our musicians were happy with how we handled the pandemic. Like I said, you can never please everybody. There may be some that, said, I just have to work. Maybe they were thinking I have to work, but I don't really want to do this. But we were pretty, I think we tried to protect them to the best of our ability.
Yes, for sure. And for those who didn't, or for those who are not so familiar with the orchestra gigging industry, per service orchestra makes the musicians are only paid per rehearsal or concert that they actually play for the orchestra. So they are paid by how many actual physical sessions that they are here playing. You don't hold a court member and then they don't have a base salary going on. It's just like whenever they play a gig, they get money.
Right.
And how about personnel? Like, I know you lose some staff and it was hard, especially how is it to manage a huge theater during the pandemic, even though no one is coming in, but you still have expenses as a historical building. As I understood, you have to maintain a certain quality of the building, right?
Right. It was a lot because we took over management of the theater. We had an international venue management company managing the theater for us and got it open. They did a great job. But as time went on, it was, it was just it's not economically feasible to keep that relationship going on. And then, with the pandemic, especially. So yes, I became the manager of the theater with a skeleton crew staff. And so yes, we had to furlough some folks and we had to definitely keep the lights off as much as possible, program the HVAC. So it was only coming on when we had to be in there. We had to really cut the fat. Just like everybody, but, and it lost a good bit of staff, which means you lose a lot of institutional knowledge. And, I don't know how to open the curtain in that theater. So we were knowing that we were probably going to be able to open back up in full swing by August of 2021. So I began rebuilding that team around in May, starting the hiring, the process or the interviewing process, and really had a whole plan of this organizational restructure with us as managers of the theater. But the best laid plans. Just all kinds of things went awry with that where, we thought we had the right person in place and to lead that team, and that didn't work out. And then had several people who we thought were going to stay on suddenly take new jobs. And right before our first non-symphony concert, I know how to do a symphony concert, but a non-symphony concert, we lost our last of our key people with institutional knowledge. So, and we still hadn't brought on the new team. So it was terrifying.
Oh my God.
But eventually they all came on board. It was June, July, August. And I think by, I want to say September, we had our full team. And so we have almost a whole new team over there, and lots of new people on the symphony staff as well. And we have a lot of job sharing that we're doing now, which has really been helpful. So people that, spend 30% of their time on symphony and 70% on Miller concerts, that kind of thing, sharing a finance director. So I'm really liking how this has panned out. So, it's just another example of you have to go through the really hard stuff that hurts your guts badly. And you can't believe you're having to go through it. But in the end, great things have come out of it. So I've learned a lot of lessons from all of that.
Yeah, for sure. The pandemic is, I don't know, kind of looking back the first year post that, or kind of trying to survive alongside the pandemic, it had been really hard, challenging to say the least. But as you said in our conversation, it seems like you deal with a lot of people, both above you and underneath you, and working alongside you. Are you always a people's person, or like how do you handle so many different styles of working and like the relationships?
Well, I think that's the thing that I've learned about myself the most through this. I think it's something that other people saw in me when they asked me to interview for this position that I just didn't know was in me. But it turns out that this is my favorite thing, is building a team. And I hate to be cheesy, but it's a little bit like conducting an orchestra, I think, trying to bring in all the right people, making the right sounds at the right times to make a beautiful piece of music. And sometimes that doesn't pan out. Maybe you've got somebody who really hasn't rehearsed, for instance, and that brings the whole team down. So I have found out that I absolutely love team building. I love trying to put together the structure of the organization and figure out how things like the job sharing. That's been really cool to me to be able to do that. So I really enjoy it. It's my favorite thing. And I think anybody who's a good leader knows you surround yourself with people who are smarter than you are. I don't know how to be the greatest marketing person. So I, hire people who are really good at social media and have great experience with design, and hire people who know how to hire the best musicians, hire people who are really good at writing grants. And because I don't have time to do all of those things. I'm running two sides of the business. So that, finding the right people and treating them well and rewarding them and guiding them and learning from them is so fun to me. I love it. But I will say that it is also the hardest part of the job, because just as soon as you think you have the best team and you've got it all figured out, there's always something that goes awry, and someone gets offered a better job, or they get, or things just suddenly don't work out and it's not a good fit. And then you have to start over again. Not necessarily over, but, so hiring and the personnel side it's my favorite, but it's also the hardest part of it for sure.
So looking ahead to the next year or years to come, now we are surviving a pandemic. What is the direction that the symphony or the theater is taking, or some new projects, visions that you think would be exciting for the coming years?
Well, haven't mentioned our community chords program. This is something we've always done, education and outreach, but sort of one of my dream projects that I came up with after being inspired at a League of American Orchestras conference, actually, was to start a music therapy program. And so we have had our music therapist. We have a board certified licensed music therapist who is on our staff, and she has created a music therapy program for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And then she's built a mindfulness program that she's really got shut down by the pandemic, but she's really launching that now. So, and that's open to the community, but we've also created community partners with area hospitals, a hospital survivorship program. So I'm really excited about seeing community chords really take off. It was just getting its stride when the pandemic hit, and now it's just going to relaunch. So I'm thrilled about that. Working always to build and diversify our audience. So we've started a program where we have a 35 and under category for our board members, and we just recruited 3 new board members who are 35 and under. And I think that will really help us in that way. We are season. Dirk has programmed a really diverse season as well. I think it's focusing on some conductors of diverse backgrounds, which I'm excited about. So we're going to really capitalize on that theme this year. And the new management of the theater, they are very creative in the kinds of events that they're bringing. And they're also doing a lot of rental events, which is a great way to control kind of what happens there and to increase income through food and beverage, to be quite honest. So that's a different direction that we're taking. So I guess and we're also, I think this is the most important thing. We've been in 2 different offices. So the symphony office is about 8 blocks away from the Miller Theater. And so that creates a real silo effect between the staffs. And we really are one staff, but we find ourselves constantly being 2 staff. So we are building out an office right next to the Miller. And so we'll all be housed together, which I cannot wait. It's going to be so helpful for so many reasons. We're just going to get great synergy between our staffs, and we can just really do some great brainstorming and not have to run down the street every time we need to talk to somebody. So,
Yeah, I think that's one thing I learned about Panamax is it's that actually seeing people that you work with has such great benefits. Like it feels so different from just like Zoom talking to others.
Yeah, I know. It's really true. We've lost a lot of those great 3 p.m. You're tired of sitting behind your desk and you just start, brainstorming with people in the office about things. And we've lost a lot of that. So I'm really excited about that. And I hope and pray that's going to happen midsummer.
That's wonderful. So to wrap up our conversation, I had just one last question. So looking back so many years of managing this building and the symphony orchestra and going through very different events, what's the biggest thing that you learned?
I think I've probably already said it, but it's just, actually, my board president said it more succinctly. He said, you should wake up every day and expect that your best person is going to leave you.
Wow.
I was like, wow, that is really depressing. But knowing that it's organic, and just when you think you've got everything fixed, something's going to break and you'll have to fix it again. So you have to really love what you do to be able to keep going back and taking those punches. And I think if I didn't love what I do, I think that would get really old. But I love working with this mission. I love, working with the musicians and my staff and my board. And so it makes it a lot easier to get out of bed, even when I know, I got a big crisis I have to deal with when I get in today, but I love what I do.
I have to admit, I didn't expect that. I was thinking that you would say something about how you started being really afraid coming to this job, and then something had changed. But this is great. Kind of really leave it in the moment and just deal with whatever happens, and you have the faith and carry on.
Yeah, I guess I've learned that about myself because I definitely I'm a worrier, but for some reason, and who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, but now when these things happen, I just kind of go, okay, well, what are we going to do? It's not the end of the world. We are not curing cancer here. So we're going to figure it out and, bring in my key people on the team and say, how are we going to figure this out? And it always works out.
That's wonderful. And thank you so much for coming to the Conductors Podcast. And Catherine, can't thank you enough.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love talking with you, and I hope to see you soon.
Here you go, my friends, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation as always. And I have to say, our conversation turned out to be not what I had expected because, one, I don't usually speak with executive directors of any symphony orchestra. Of course, I'm friends with quite a few, but that's something about colleagues. You don't really talk about issues or share each other's experiences as in an interview, our daily lives. When I meet my friends, would be even if we go out for coffee or if we just catch up via email, there's small talks, like recent project, but I rarely have the opportunity to talk to someone about their experience managing the group. And I really appreciate how Anne Catherine had opened up and talked about her experiences. And I have to say, My observation through our chat was that she has such great interpersonal skills. If you remember how she described each project, her colleagues, she always has such a positive things to say about everyone. I don't have better words than positive, but she's encouraging. She tries to engage people who work with her. And this is also my impression of her. I mostly work under the music director, Maestro Dirk Meyer. For some other positions that I have worked with, sometimes I will have some more work interaction with, say, the educational or development, not educational or outreach director, or sometimes artistic planning people, depending on how they name those titles. But for Augusta Symphony, I mostly only work with Maestro. He gives me assignments or he tells me what to do, what he needs help with. And of course, sometimes I help out with the staff when I'm on site. But every single time I meet NSC and Catherine, she's always engaging and greets me with great smiles and checking in, very, very caring to see if I'm doing okay, if there's anything that she can do to help me being better at my job, or like anything that she can accommodate, or she is on top of everything, but not in a micromanaging way, of course, in a manner of very caring and supportive. So that's something that I admire about her, and also something that I learned through her leadership style. Even though, as she said, she's not a musician, she doesn't know much about ensembles and orchestra playing or repertoire or, singers, soloists. But she listens to all of us. She will ask us how we think, and she finds the great people to do every different part of the job that requires to run an organization. There's marketing, there's development, there's financial, there's music, there's management. And she has such a great team. And that's also part of what I just shared in episode 40 about how I observed different types of leadership skills, leadership styles, and ways of working and engaging with colleagues. And that's something that had been really, really special for me. And it's such a pleasure for me to work with the Augusta Symphony for sure. And I hope you are having a great June so far and have a great summer plan. I hope that you're getting some rest, getting out of this overwhelming beginning of 2021, and take good care. I will see you next week at the same time, same place. Bye for now.